Welcome to the PEDcast. In the last 5 months, we've featured the work of early career researchers. We've seen fieldwork in action both home and abroad. We've interviewed people both within and beyond academia. And we've even talked to NASA about growing soil on Mars. And coming up this month,
I think it's important that children learn where their food comes from.
we look ahead to Open Farm Sunday. Professor Mark Reed has another tip to stimulate our research impact.
For me, this is an exercise in scratching your head and trying to work out, well, how could I make this relevant?
We'll take a look at where soil has made the headlines.
So soil has thousands of things living in there, and we can pull that out with the DNA.
And news about the BS Cube annual conference and the events coming up this month.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing.
Hello, welcome to the PEDcast. It's end of May and it's a beautiful day here. PEDcast this month being broadcast from my home county of Norfolk. Where else? This is the Norfolk Coast Path, as you might have guessed, and it's on the outskirts of one of my favourite towns called Sheringham. One of my favourite towns in the UK, that is. It's here in Norfolk that inspired me to love the natural environment, to get outdoors and study it, to follow on that study, to do geography at undergraduate level, and then finally to study soil science. It's this place which I always will call home.
Happy we'll be beyond the sea, and never again I'll go say.
I live and work in Lancaster, just a stone's throw away from the Lake District. But it wasn't the Lake District that captivated me when I was little. It was growing up on a patchwork quilt of Norfolk farmland, stitched together by the hedgerows, that first fueled my affinity towards nature. It was here, in the heart of the Norfolk Broads, that I fostered a relationship with the rural landscape. Over time, as I was introduced to the perils of erosion and land degradation at school, college and university, this relationship was moulded into one of care and preservation. I found myself not simply loving the countryside, but defending it, wanting to protect it, as any steward would. My first encounter with soil science was not in Norfolk, but in southern Spain. But it was here, just a few hundred metres from my house, that I conducted my undergraduate dissertation, a study into the effects of taproots on soil erosion. So, what started out as an earthy playground became an outside laboratory, and now it's a place I love to return to. It was simply an inspiration.
Well, Norfolk inspired me to get outdoors and study the soil. Which place inspired you to take up soil science? you can email me at the PEDcast, student@soils.org.uk.
Perhaps you were inspired by an event at your local farm. Next month, hundreds of farms around the country will be opening their doors, well, gates, for Open Farm Sunday. Here's a taster of what happened last year.
The British farming industry needs the public to buy British food, and we need people to value the food that they eat, and just to come out on a farm and actually see the work, the passion that goes into it, and hopefully visitors will go away with a much better understanding, a much better connection with where their foods come from.
Most things when you come for your breakfast will start off as wheat. So if you look at this wheat here, and you can put your hands in and have a feel.
My best part of the day was playing on the hay bales. Thank you very much.
What is in the cow sheds is absolutely awesome, and the cows look happy and content.
It's been a good ride round. We live on the estate, but you don't realise just how big it is. But everybody's so friendly and everything, and it's a marvellous day out. The farming is brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you!
So a huge thank you to all the farmers, helpers and of course our sponsors that have taken part in this year's Open Farm Sunday. It's been a fantastic event and a great opportunity for people to understand more about the story behind their food and discover all the wonderful things going on farm, from the technology to the care for the environment and of course to the production of our food. And next year's Open Farm Sunday, put in the diary already, the 10th of June 2018.
Thank you.
And a big thank you from Daddy.
Thank you.
I'm in the heart of Sheringham Park. I've been coming here as long as I can remember, at least from a very young boy, but I've never come down this track before. So I've got the PEDcast to thank for that. And it's great to get away from it all sometimes, away from the hurly-burly of the PhD. And in a sense, on the PEDcast, we like to give a flavour of the kind of things to think about beyond the world of soil science. One of those is research impact, and our guest contributor, Professor Mark Reed from Newcastle University, is here now with another tip to stimulate our research impact.
One of the ways that I think researchers can save the most time on their pathway to impact is thinking in a much more hard-nosed way about who you invest time speaking to, engaging with, and who you do not spend time speaking to and engaging with. There is a limited time in every day, in every week, in every month, and actually if you were to look at all the publics, all the stakeholders, all the organisations who in theory have an interest in your work and try and reach out to them, you wouldn't do the research. So we need to have a clear way of deciding who do I talk to and who do I say, well, maybe later, or engage in a more efficient way, say through a newsletter or social media, for example. A tool that I use is something called stakeholder analysis. I call this stakeholder or publics analysis because you can use it for either group. And this is a really simple way of trying to understand who out of the range of organisations you might work with, out of the different publics who may have an interest in your work, is most interested? And then secondly, in terms of stakeholder organisations, who has most influence? Now that influence can be for good or for bad. There will be some organisations who are hugely interested in your work because they hate it and they want to oppose it in every way they can. And you need to identify those groups up front as much as the groups who love what you're doing and for whom your impact is their impact. And they will actually throw resources, staff, money, data at you to help you on your pathway to impact. When you're looking at stakeholders, instead of looking at influence, I might then change that and think about relative level of benefits. So I'm now looking at those who are most interested, but who will benefit most as well. And you can kind of mix and match it a bit. But we're looking at the people who are most interested and who will benefit and be able to influence to enable us to achieve impact. When you do that, what falls out of that not only is the high benefits, high interest and the high influence groups, but also the hard to reach groups. And that for me actually is some of the most useful information you get from this. So those publics who would actually benefit enormously from this research, if only they would come along to your events, if you could actually reach out to them. And then for me, this is an exercise in scratching your head and trying to work out, well, how could I make this relevant? Like, how could I take it to them and make it resonate for them so they get that benefit? How could I take this from the edge of a decision maker's desk into the centre of their desk so they actually do listen to what we're doing and help us rather than oppose us? So using these kinds of tools, you can systematically now work out some of these really important organisations, groups you need to engage with, also some of the harder reach groups that might otherwise fall off your radar. The final thing for me in this that makes this so valuable and where you start to save time is that what you now have is a list of organisations or groups, and they are prioritised. You're prioritising them in whatever way you want. So actually for me, I tend to prioritise the hard to reach group first, rather than necessarily the most influential group first. And you can now have that targeted, ranked list of organisations, and you simply start at the top. And it may be that I have time in the next 3 months to reach out to 3 organisations, and I spend 15 minutes per month reaching out to those 3 organisations. And actually, maybe I get busy, and that's the only 3 organisations I find time to reach out to. I spent 3/4 of an hour over 3 months, and I have now significantly increased my potential for impact because I have, in a targeted way, reached out to the groups or organisations that are most important for me to reach out to. Instead of taking the more reactive approach, which is much more normal, of, well, I'll talk to whoever knocks on my door, whoever comes to my event, whoever shouts loudest, whether or not they are actually the groups who would benefit most or could influence most. And actually now I can, with a clean conscience, say, well, you know what? It's maybe not as much time as I wanted to give to it, but it's all I can give to it, and at least I spent that time in as efficient and as valuable a way as possible.
Well, don't say I don't give you anything new on the PEDcast. It's time for a new feature, Soil in the News. And it does pretty much what it says on the tin. A roundup of the world of soil science this month.
It's 6 o'clock on Thursday the 17th of May. Good morning. This is Today with Martha Carney in London and Justin Webb in Aberystwyth.
One of the great pleasures of our tour of universities is to get a taste of the research work that goes on in corners of the country. And here at Aberystwyth University, we're focusing now on something that, well, perhaps too often we don't focus on enough. It is soil and soil health. and it's actually going to be a whole section of the post-Brexit agriculture bill. It does matter for pretty obvious reasons. Here at Aberystwyth, they are very focused on soil, and particularly soil DNA. And Dr. Arwen Edwards is Senior Lecturer in Biology here at Aberystwyth University. Morning to you. Now, what is it that you are? I say soil DNA. What can you do here that in other places that can't?
So what we can do is take a sample of DNA from the environment and directly decode its genes so that we understand the nature of the organisms that are living there, which organisms are living there, what they're doing.
And with the soil that you sample, what can it tell you about the health of that soil and its ability to create and sustain life?
So essentially, the challenge that we have with soil is that pretty much everything that lives in soil is microscopic. Now, if I were a zoologist, I could have my tiger spotted in the distance with a pair of binoculars, or if I were a botanist, I could go and count the daisies. But if I'm looking at microscopic things, it's quite difficult because they're all very small, they all look very much alike. But the things that they do are truly vital to the planet's health and to our health. So understanding who lives there is quite important. So we can figure out how many organisms are there. We know that soil is incredibly biodiverse. So if you think about the Amazon rainforest, we think about that as being the peak of biodiversity. That's nothing on soil.
DNA from samples of soil from presenter Justin Webb's London garden were compared with those from that of University Vice-Chancellor Professor Elizabeth Treasure. The findings were revealed at the end of the programme.
Thank you, Martha. The time is 9:03. Welcome back to Aberystwyth University. Let us go back to the soil, because here at the university they've been using their expertise to sequence the DNA of the soil from my garden. Dr. Arwen Evans, we heard from him earlier in the programme, is here. What have you been doing?
So in about 2.5 hours this morning, we've gone from getting the soil sample, extracting DNA from it, and then sequencing it. That is reading the genetic code of the organisms that are living in there. And we've gone very, very quickly then to analyse it to see which living organisms are there. And we've got differences between your soil sample and Professor Treasure's soil samples.
Which are what? And Professor Treasure provided her own, so Professor Treasure is the boss here. She's provided her own soil sample as well. What are the differences?
So the differences are driven by soil pH. So this is really important, how acid or alkaline the soil is. And the soil here in Aberystwyth is a little bit more acidic, 10 times more acidic, in fact, than your compost. And so we see bacteria that are very good at living in acidic conditions, so-called acidobacteria. And there's a real hotspot of diversity in terms of the acidobacteria that are present in Professor Treasure's soil. In your soil, it's slightly different. You've got very common or garden bacteria in many ways.
Could you have told if I got a body bit in my garden? That's what slightly worried me earlier on.
Almost, because 1% of the data that we got from your sample, it was a species known as Propionibacterium acnes, which, the clue's in the name, it's from skin, it's from zits specifically. So I wondered, did somebody wear gloves or not wear gloves when collecting the sample?
Oh no, too much detail.
Well, if you want a springtime afternoon in the sun with peace and tranquility of the Norfolk countryside, I can't think of anywhere better than here in North Norfolk. Sheringham Park, it's a wonderful place. But there are other events happening around the country, and here is a preview of the ones that you might be interested in the next couple of months.
7th of June, there's an informal sea soil meeting at Hendred Farms in East Hendred, bringing together farmers and researchers to exchange ideas, research and practices on soil management in agricultural systems. Everyone is welcome, but please come prepared to discuss topics like soil carbon and nutrient management. It's free for members and £15 for non-members, and lunch and refreshments will be provided. Soils are crucial for sustainable development, and healthy soils are central to achieving many of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The 2018 annual conference of the British Society of Soil Science will provide an opportunity to focus on soils and the Sustainable Development Goals. The conference at Lancaster University will take place on the 4th to the 5th of September and will feature keynote speakers addressing issues such as soils and food security, climate change, health and water quality. The Society is now inviting contributions that address one or more Sustainable Development Goals. If you would like to submit an abstract, you have until June the 10th to do so. Visit the BSQ website for more details.
About it for the PEDcast this month. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any comments and queries for the next programme, don't hesitate to contact me on the address below. But until the next time, have a fantastic June. And from me, Daniel Evans, bye bye.